Well, guys, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers former assistant GM has been hired by the Las Vegas Raiders, John Spytek, to be their new GM. I love this move. Spytek has been in the NFL since 2014, working as a player personnel intern, and now he's going to be the GM of the Raiders. Las Vegas, they just need some consistency, though, guys. They've had a lot of different GMs since relocating to Las Vegas from Oakland in 2020. I mean, we're talking about five now to be exact. So they just need to find someone who can just stay here and build up this football team. And this is the best opportunity to do so because Tom Brady is serving as the Miami owner. So you've got him to be able to come in and help out and make decisions. But it's also the Raiders. They've never really been in this situation. They were going to have the second most cap space. They're going to have a ton of draft capital, including the sixth pick in the draft. It's not a very friendly QB class, but it seems like whenever we don't expect it to be a good QB class, it is, right? Like, who expected this past class to be as great as it was? Like, Jaden Daniels looks like a generational talent. Drake May looks like a future star. And then, of course, Bo Nix looks like a future star. And then, of course, we'll see what happens with Caleb Williams and Michael Penix. But this is a good quarterback class, man. And for the Raiders, the first thing they need to do is going to be to bring in a new head coach. I think it's going to be Pete Carroll. He is 73 years old, but that actually benefits the Raiders because he's got that experience. He's won a Super Bowl. He's been coaching for nearly 20 years in the NFL. I mean, this just seems like a match made in heaven. Also, a defensive mind, too. The Raiders don't need a guy like a Ben Johnson, someone who can come in here and be able to call the plays. They just need someone who's been in a winning culture, a winning situation, because the Raiders have not done a lot of winning lately. So I do think Pete Carroll will end up getting the job. I did make a video earlier talking about Deion Sanders, but that was more of just a video for fun. I don't see that as very realistic, even though Prime does want the job. But I don't think Mark Davis would bring in a new GM and a new head coach. And he did say that previously, that that's just not something he's looking to do. But in terms of what's being inherited for Spytek, the new GM, the first and most important thing is Brock Bowers. I mean, he put together the greatest tight end season we've honestly ever seen from a rookie. Like, I don't even think it's debatable. I mean, he literally goes out there, makes all pro. He's the only rookie to make all pro. I mean, broke multiple records. Mike Ditka's receiving record, Puka Nakua's reception record, not only for a rookie, but just in NFL history. Like, that's so impressive. He passed Darren Waller's 107 receptions, which was the most by a Raider in the history of the franchise. But it wasn't just Brock Bowers. Like, he's getting all of the love. But what about Jakobi Meyers, guys? He had a fantastic season. He had 87 receptions, 1,027 yards. I won my fantasy championship because of this man, starting him against the Chargers in Week 18. Three 100-yard games. I mean, that was the same amount he had in the first 5 seasons of his career. And he was undrafted, too. So great find by the Raiders. So they've got two studs to be able to catch the football. The run game, obviously, was not great, but it picked up in the second half of the season. And the offensive line definitely needs to step up, man. It was pretty mid. Like, being mid is probably being generous. Like, the offensive line was just honestly one of the worst in the league. It wasn't like 28th, but it was, I would say it was probably like the 22nd best from the eye test. It just was not amazing. But hopefully the Raiders can address that in free agency and the draft. In terms of the defense, I actually think the Raiders have a lot of playmakers. They do have a lot of defensive players hitting free agency, so that's something they're going to have to address. Like Trayvon Mulrig, Robert Spillane, like these guys absolutely should be Raiders for a long, long time, man. Max Crosby, they're going to want to give him some guaranteed money to keep him happy. I mean, even though Max missed a lot of games, like he still literally had a phenomenal season. I mean, 17 tackles for a loss, still ranked the 4th best in Raiders history, and the guy ended up missing, what was it, like, I think it was 15, 16, 17. I think Max missed 3 games, and he still had an amazing season, made the Pro Bowl. Special teams is phenomenal. Daniel Carlson didn't even miss a single kick inside of 30 yards, which is great. I thought AJ Cole had one of the best punting seasons in football. What really needs to be addressed, I would say, is just the trenches and then the run game and then the quarterback position, which is basically the most important things. But just knowing that there's playmakers on the defense. Of course, you have salary cap, you have draft capital. You've got Tom Brady who can work with their new quarterback, which probably means the Raiders are going to end up drafting one. I don't see why Sam Darnold would make a lot of sense here just because it's a Band-Aid. I mean, even if Darnold ends up being a really good quarterback, like what's your ceiling with Sam Darnold in the division with Bo Nix, Patrick Mahomes, and Justin Herbert? It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me as well. I mean, the Raiders offense finished 27th, 303.2 yards per game. The Cleveland Browns guys had 300.8 yards per game. The offensive line actually did rank 22nd, just ahead of the Saints. They had a grade of 69.4, which is a D plus, of course. So not amazing. I mean, their pressure rate of 35.8% ranks 20th. So, especially, picking up the blitz, 46.6% pressure rate, that's 28th. The run game, 22nd in RBWR, 21st in RBY, BC, and rush, 0.85. So, guys, the blocking just was not phenomenal. Losing Josh Jacobs, I still don't know why the Raiders let him walk. I mean, I get that Zeus was fantastic in games Jacob missed, but I mean, clearly that was a huge, huge mistake. Like, that was not as big of a mistake of letting Derrick Henry and Saquon go, but it was right next to them. But just looking at in terms of the Raiders' assets, they have the second best assets according to PFF. Just going off of course, draft capital, effective cap space, and restructuring potential. Just given the circumstance that the Raiders are in, it definitely makes the most sense to draft a potential franchise quarterback. The issue with free agency is it comes before the draft. So all of a sudden, if the Raiders do bring in, let's say, Justin Fields or Sam Darnold, well, then they're not going to obviously draft a quarterback early on, like maybe like day 2, day 3. But just with Bowers, with Myers, of course, upgrading the offensive line, I do think that the Raiders will get their guy, whether it be in the second round or be at number 6. They could take Shador, they could take Cam Ward, they could take Jalen Milroe, or they could just wait and try to find like a diamond in the rough. But just, I don't think there's a lot of time to waste here, just given the fact that all 3 other teams in their division made the playoffs and the Raiders didn't. They couldn't even win 5 games. So there's a lot of work to do. They could bring in Aaron Jones in the offseason. I wouldn't mind that move at all. Charvarius Ward defensively is another option that comes to my mind. Let's look at the schedule for the Raiders. So they're going to have away games. That's what I want to look at first. Kansas City, Denver, Los Angeles, Houston, Indy, Philly, Washington, New England. So we're looking at, I would say New England's like the one team that struggled. The rest of these teams made the playoffs or were the only team that didn't make the playoffs actually was the Colts, and they were like 2 games out. So the rest of the teams literally made the playoffs. So that's going to be tough. So knowing that, hey, look, our road games are all going to be tough. Road games are tough to begin with, but especially against good teams. Home games, Denver, Kansas City, Los Angeles, Jacksonville, Tennessee, Dallas, New York, Cleveland, Chicago. Okay, the home games are much easier, but still, just knowing the fact that you've got to play in your division, 6 times a year, and then road games against the Commanders, Eagles, the 2 teams representing the NFC Championship. The Texans are only going to get better. The Colts, I think, are going to be pretty solid. I mean, there's just not a lot of time to waste here. And if Sam Darnold is in free agency, it kind of shows all you need to know, right? Like, great quarterbacks just don't go to free agency, man. I mean, I guess technically Peyton Manning Wednesday when he got cut by the Colts, but that's because they had Andrew Luck coming in, the most polished quarterback in the history of football through the draft. So, I mean, just being able to find a quarterback in free agency, like, that's just not going to work for the Raiders. And I think they know that, and I do think they'll draft their guy. And I do think it will end up being Shador Sanders, to be honest with you. We'll have to wait and see if he's able to hit his potential, but he's close with Tom Brady, and he probably is worth around the 6th pick. I mean, yeah, sure, maybe in a lot of other drafts he doesn't go 6, but teams need quarterbacks they're going to reach, and I think the Raiders should do it. Because at one point, remember when everyone said that the Broncos were reaching for Bo Nix, and he ended up being one of the best rookies in the game. So I think the Raiders will follow that same path too.